K2 is the second highest mountain on Earth. It stands at 8,611 meters. Its peak touches the cold, thin sky on the border of Pakistan and China. Climbers call it the Savage Mountain. This is not just a name, it is a warning. K2 is much harder to climb than Mount Everest. For every 4 people who reach its summit, 1 person dies trying. The mountain has steep slopes of ice and rock. The weather changes quickly. Violent storms can appear from a clear blue sky. The air is so thin that the human body starts to die. On K2 there is no room for small mistakes. The mountain does not forgive. Its history is filled with stories of great climbers who never returned. Their dreams and ambitions are buried under the snow and ice. In the summer of 2008, many teams gathered at the foot of this giant. They came from all over the world. They came with hope. They came with experience. They looked up at the massive pyramid of rock and ice. They were ready to test themselves against the Savage Mountain. The route they chose was the Abruzzi Spur. It is the most common path, but it is not an easy one. By the end of July 2008, the teams at base camp felt a sense of urgency. The short summer climbing season was coming to an end. The weather reports showed a small window of good conditions approaching. August 1st was chosen as the day for the summit attempt. It was a big, collective push. Teams from the Netherlands agreed to work together. Teams from Korea agreed to work together. Teams from Serbia agreed to work together. Teams from Norway agreed to work together. Teams from Italy agreed to work together. Teams from Pakistan agreed to work together. This cooperation was essential. They would share the work of fixing ropes. They would break trail for each other. The plan was to create a single, strong line of climbers moving toward the top. The climbers would leave Camp 4 very late at night. They would climb through the darkness. They aimed to reach the dangerous Bottleneck at first light. The goal was to stand on top by midday. This would leave the entire afternoon for a safe descent. They were all individuals, but on this day, their lives would be connected by a single rope and a shared dream. But the crucial ropes through the Bottleneck were not yet in place. The task of fixing these lines was left for the summit day itself. This delay was a small crack in the foundation of their plan. On the evening of July 31st, the air at Camp 4 was still and cold. The sky was filled with stars. The conditions seemed perfect. Inside their tents, climbers checked their gear. They melted snow for water. There was a feeling of nervous excitement. This was the moment they had been training for. Around midnight, the first headlamps began to switch on. Small circles of light moved out of the tents and onto the snow. The final push had begun. Each step was an effort. The snow crunched loudly in the silent, frozen night. Then the first tragedy struck. It happened before the sun had even risen. A Serbian climber, Dren Mandic, became unclipped from the rope line. He lost his footing on the steep, icy slope. He fell. The fall was fast and long. He could not stop himself. His death sent a wave of shock through the line of climbers. Some climbers wanted to turn back. They felt it was a bad omen, a sign from the mountain. Others argued that they should continue. They had come so far. A lot of time was lost in this debate. The sun was beginning to rise, and the climbers were still far below the Bottleneck. The carefully planned schedule was already broken. The climbers were losing a precious resource they could never get back: time. As the sun finally illuminated the upper slopes of K2, the line of climbers reached the base of the Bottleneck. Here, they faced their next major problem. The ropes that were supposed to be fixed through this dangerous gully were not ready. The lead climbers were supposed to be fast and efficient, but they were struggling. The task of drilling ice screws and securing the ropes was slow and exhausting. The line of climbers behind them grew longer and longer. They were stuck, waiting at the most dangerous spot on the mountain. The giant serac loomed over the Bottleneck like a hanging cliff of ice. It was a terrifying sight. It was a constant, silent threat. Every climber knew that it could break at any time. While they waited, small pieces of ice would occasionally break free and tumble down the gully. They were trapped. They could not go up. Going down would mean giving up on their dream. The rope-fixing situation became chaotic. There were not enough new ropes. Some of the porters had carried the ropes to the wrong location. Climbers began to use old ropes left from previous expeditions, but these ropes were worn and unreliable. The delays mounted. Morning turned into midday. The sun was high in the sky. According to their plan, they should have been on the summit hours ago. Instead, they were still struggling in the Bottleneck. Despite the delays and the growing danger, the desire to reach the summit was too strong. One by one, in small groups, the climbers managed to get through the bottleneck. They climbed past the point of the main danger from the Serac, but the summit was now in sight. It was a clear, sunny day. The temptation to continue was overwhelming. They decided to keep going up, even though they knew it would be dark by the time they descended. The final push to the summit was a slow, painful crawl. After exiting the bottleneck, the climbers moved onto the final summit ridge. The path was narrow. On one side was a sheer drop of thousands of meters. The snow was deep and soft in places, making every step a struggle. The climbers were physically drained. They were running low on oxygen. Their minds were clouded by the altitude, but they were driven by a powerful force. They could see the highest point. Between 3:30 p.m. and 5:30 p.m., the first climbers stepped onto the summit of K2. It was a moment of pure joy and triumph. They had made it. They stood on top of the savage mountain. They hugged each other. They cried. They took photos against the backdrop of the endless peaks of the Karakoram. But their victory was happening in the shadow of a rapidly approaching crisis. The sun was already low in the sky. The light began to turn golden. The light began to turn orange. The shadows grew long. This beautiful sunset was a terrible warning. Darkness was coming. The Norwegian climber Rolf Bae was one of the first to reach the summit. He looked at the time. He understood the danger immediately. He did not stay to celebrate. Others lingered on the summit, savoring their achievement. Their descent would be a journey into a nightmare of darkness, cold, and broken ropes. As darkness fell upon K2, the descending climbers arrived back at the top of the bottleneck. They reached for the fixed ropes that were their lifeline to Camp 4. But something was terribly wrong. In the chaos of the ascent, the ropes had been poorly managed. Some lines were missing, others were tangled. Finding the correct path down the steep ice gully in the dark was becoming a desperate and confusing task. Then, the mountain roared. A deep, cracking sound echoed from high above. It was the sound every climber had feared. A huge section of the Great Serac had broken off. A massive avalanche of ice the size of houses collapsed. It thundered down the bottleneck at incredible speed. It was a white river of death, destroying everything in its path. Climbers who were in the gully were hit directly. Some were swept away into the dark abyss. Their lives ended in an instant. The force of the avalanche was unimaginable. The mountain had sprung its trap. The falling ice did more than just kill. It also sheared away the fixed ropes. The thin lines of safety that connected the climbers to the mountain were gone. They were cut. They were buried. They were swept away. This was a catastrophic development. The climbers who were still above the bottleneck were now completely stranded. They were trapped at over 8,200 meters. Their path down was gone. Below them was a steep, dark wall of ice. Above them was the empty summit. They were on a tiny island in the sky with no way off. Among the first victims of the Serac fall was the Norwegian climber Rolf Bae. The Irish climber Ger MacDonald, instead of trying to save himself, went to help the trapped Korean climbers. The night of August 1st was a scene of absolute chaos in the death zone. The temperature plummeted, the wind picked up, driving sharp ice crystals into any exposed skin. The surviving climbers were scattered across the face of the mountain. They were in darkness, lit only by the weak beams of their headlamps. Many were injured. Most were suffering from severe frostbite. They were exhausted. They were dehydrated. They were running out of oxygen. Their minds were numb with shock and fear. They were fighting for their lives minute by minute. In the midst of this horror, there were incredible acts of courage. The Irish climber Ger MacDonald, instead of trying to save himself, went to help the trapped Korean climbers. He spent hours in the dark, at extreme altitude, trying to free them from a tangle of ropes. This selfless act likely cost him his own life. More ice fell later in the night, and Ger MacDonald was never seen again. He became the first person from Ireland to summit K2, but he would not return. Pemba Galja Sherpa emerged as another hero that night. He had managed to get down to Camp 4, but he knew people were still trapped above. Despite his own exhaustion, he turned around and went back up into the darkness. He found the Italian climber Marco Confortola and another climber. He helped them begin a slow, desperate descent. His bravery and clear thinking saved lives in a situation where most people were completely overwhelmed. For those trapped above the bottleneck, it was a night of pure survival. They were forced to bivouac, to spend the night in the open, on the steep, icy slope. Wilco van Rooyen, the Dutch team leader, became separated from the others. He was lost, snowblind, and alone. He spent the night wandering in the death zone, somehow surviving the extreme cold and lack of oxygen. When the sun rose on August 2nd, it revealed a scene of devastation. The sky was clear, but the upper slopes of K2 were a graveyard. The survivors who had spent the night in the open were barely alive. They were covered in frost. Their fingers were black with severe frostbite. Their toes were black with severe frostbite. They were moving like ghosts. The long process of getting down the mountain began. Every step was agony. They had to descend the Bottleneck without the safety of fixed ropes. They had to downclimb on shattered ice, knowing that one slip would be fatal. Marco Confortola, the Italian climber, was in terrible shape. His feet were frozen solid. He could barely stand. Pemba Gyalya helped him and another climber make their way down. It was a slow process. It was a torturous process. At Camp 4, other climbers who had made it down were too exhausted or frostbitten to mount a major rescue. They could only offer hot drinks and encouragement to those who staggered back into camp. Small rescue efforts were attempted, but the route was too dangerous. The mountain was still shedding ice. The risk of sending more people into the Bottleneck was too high. Wilco van Rooyen's survival was a miracle. After spending 2 nights lost in the death zone, wandering without gear, he somehow found his way down. He had followed a different route, away from the main path. He eventually stumbled into a lower camp, more dead than alive. He was severely frostbitten and snowblind, but his will to live had pulled him through. His story became one of the most remarkable tales of survival in the history of mountaineering. He had walked through hell and come back. Slowly, over the next few days, the last of the survivors made it down to base camp. They brought with them stories of horror, loss, and incredible bravery. The true scale of the disaster became clear. 11 climbers had died. They were husbands, fathers, sons, and daughters from Korea, Nepal, Pakistan, France, Serbia, Ireland, and Norway. The 2008 K2 disaster was a powerful and tragic lesson for climbers. It highlights the critical importance of careful planning and preparation. The initial decision to leave rope fixing for the Bottleneck on summit day was a key factor. This created delays, triggering a domino effect. On a mountain where every minute counts, poor logistics can be fatal. No detail is too small. Turnaround times are absolute. Every expedition needs a strict, non-negotiable turnback time. On August 1st, 2008, many climbers pushed for the summit late into the afternoon. Summit fever, the desire to reach the top, overrode better judgment. The summit is only half the climb. A living climber who turns back is better than a dead one who reached the top. Teamwork is crucial. Initial cooperation broke down. Communication failed. Plans were ignored. Jer McDonnell, selfless actions. Pemba Gyalya, selfless actions. In the death zone, you're as strong as the person next to you. K2 had the final say, a brutal reminder of objective mountain dangers. You can have a perfect plan, but an unstable serac can fall. This story isn't about blame. It's about small issues compounding into catastrophe. Human ambition, human error, human courage. Memorials and prayer flags on K2, the final image. The 2008 K2 disaster remains one of the deadliest days in mountaineering history. The savage mountain stands unchanged, a reminder of nature's ultimate power. We remember those who dared to dream of touching the sky, and we honor their courage, even as we learn from their fate.